Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous people in any room are never the ones shouting the loudest? How the greatest threats to power never announce themselves with grand declarations? How the fall of empires, the collapse of careers, the destruction of relationships almost always begins not with a bang, but with something far more insidious. This video will reveal a truth so uncomfortable, so contrary to our instincts for fairness and justice, that you'll want to reject it immediately. But understanding this principle might be the difference between maintaining your power and losing everything you've built. The 46th law of power states, "Never appear too perfect." And buried within this deceptively simple statement is a psychological mechanism so powerful, so deeply rooted in human nature, that it has toppled kings, destroyed careers, and turned allies into assassins throughout all of human history. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why excellence can be your greatest vulnerability, why competence breeds enemies, and why the most successful wielders of power deliberately cultivate flaws that aren't really flaws at all. You'll see the invisible social dynamics that govern every hierarchy, every organization, every human group. And you'll never look at success, envy, or social positioning the same way again. Let me take you deep into the darkest corners of human psychology, where our most primitive instincts collide with our modern pretensions of rationality and fairness. Here's a truth that cuts against everything we're taught about merit, hard work, and success. Human beings are not rational evaluators of excellence. We are emotional, comparative, status-obsessed primates whose brains evolved not for fairness but for survival in competitive social hierarchies. When you encounter someone who appears perfect, someone who seems to have no flaws, someone who excels at everything they touch, your conscious mind might admire them. You might even praise them publicly. But something ancient and primitive activates deep in your neural architecture. Something that predates language, that predates civilization, that comes from millions of years of evolution in small social groups where relative status determined access to food, mates, and survival itself. That something is envy. And envy is perhaps the most destructive force in human social dynamics. But we need to understand what envy actually is, because it's not simply wanting what someone else has. That's desire. Envy is darker, more complex, more dangerous. Envy is the pain you feel at another person's success combined with the desire to see them brought down. It's not that you want what they have. It's that you want them to not have it. You want their excellence diminished, their perfection shattered, their superiority eliminated. And here's the twisted psychology: the more perfect someone appears, the more envy they generate. Because perfection is unbearable to witness. It highlights every one of your own inadequacies. It makes your achievements seem smaller. It reminds you constantly of everything you're not. Your brain doesn't process this rationally. Your prefrontal cortex, your rational mind, might tell you that someone else's success doesn't diminish yours, that you should be inspired rather than threatened, that their excellence has nothing to do with your worth. But your limbic system, your emotional brain, your status monitoring machinery doesn't care about these rational arguments. It only cares about one question: where do I rank in the hierarchy relative to this person? And when someone appears too perfect, when they seem to occupy a position of such superiority that you could never reach it, something breaks in the social calculation. They're not just ahead of you. They're in a different category entirely. They make you feel small, inadequate, inferior. And that feeling is unbearable. So what does your brain do? It searches desperately for flaws. It looks for any crack in the perfect facade, any hint that this person is actually vulnerable, actually human, actually fallible like you. Because if you can find the flaw, if you can spot the weakness, then they're not actually superior. They're just pretending to be. And then the envy transforms into something even more dangerous: righteous anger. They were fooling everyone. They were frauds. And now you're justified in destroying them. This is the psychological mechanism that makes appearing too perfect so lethally dangerous. Let's travel back to ancient Athens, to the golden age of democracy, philosophy, and culture. Athens had developed a unique political institution called ostracism. Once a year, the citizens could vote to exile any person from the city for 10 years. No trial. No accusation of crime. No defense. Just a vote. And who do you think they exiled? Criminals? Traitors? Corrupt officials? Sometimes. But more often, they exiled the most prominent, most successful, most excellent citizens. Men who had served Athens brilliantly. Men who had won military victories. Men who had contributed to Athens's prosperity and power. Why? Because these men appeared too perfect. Too successful. Too far above their fellow citizens. Their excellence made ordinary Athenians feel inferior. Their prominence threatened the egalitarian ideal of democracy where no citizen should tower too far above others. Consider Aristides, called Aristides the Just because of his legendary fairness and integrity. He was exactly what you'd think a democracy would want: honest, capable, fair-minded, devoted to Athens. But the Athenians ostracized him. When asked why he voted for ostracism, one citizen who couldn't even write said he was tired of hearing Aristides called the Just. The man's very perfection, his very excellence, his very lack of visible flaws, made him intolerable. This is the paradox at the heart of Law 46. The qualities that should make you most valuable, most admired, most successful are the very qualities that make you most vulnerable to destruction. Think about this pattern in modern contexts. How many brilliant executives have been forced out of companies not because they failed but because they succeeded too spectacularly? How many talented employees have found themselves isolated, undermined, and eventually pushed out not because they were incompetent but because they were too competent? The person who appears perfect generates a gravitational field of envy around them. And envy seeks outlets. If you give envious people no legitimate way to criticize you, no visible flaw they can attack, they'll invent flaws. They'll interpret your actions in the worst possible light. They'll create narratives where your virtues are actually vices in disguise. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your competence becomes showing off. Your success becomes evidence you must be cheating or cutting corners or stabbing people in the back. Because if you're truly that good, if you're truly that perfect, then what does that say about everyone else? It says they're inadequate. And people will destroy you rather than accept that conclusion. Now let's examine one of history's most dramatic examples of Law 46 in action: the fall of Maximilien Robespierre during the French Revolution. Robespierre was, by all accounts, incorruptible. In an era of massive corruption, he took no bribes. In a time of decadence, he lived simply. In a revolution where leaders enriched themselves, he remained poor. He was called the Incorruptible. He genuinely believed in the revolutionary ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. He worked tirelessly for what he saw as the good of France. And he was absolutely rigid in his virtue. He demanded perfection not just from himself but from everyone. He saw compromise as corruption. He viewed disagreement as treason. He believed that revolutionary France needed to be purged of all imperfection, all vice, all deviation from perfect republican virtue. This led to the Terror, where thousands were executed for insufficient revolutionary enthusiasm. But here's what's fascinating from the perspective of Law 46: Robespierre wasn't executed because he was corrupt or because he failed. He was executed precisely because he appeared too perfect, too virtuous, too incorruptible. His fellow revolutionaries couldn't attack him on grounds of corruption because he genuinely wasn't corrupt. They couldn't accuse him of luxury because he lived simply. They couldn't question his devotion to revolutionary principles because he embodied them absolutely. His perfection made him unassailable through normal political means. But it also made him unbearable. His very incorruptibility was an implicit accusation against everyone else. His virtue highlighted their vices. His ideological purity made their compromises look like betrayals. Every time they looked at Robespierre, they saw a reflection of their own inadequacy. So they destroyed him. They formed a coalition not of principle but of mutual fear and envy. They spread rumors that he was planning to execute them all. They painted his virtue as secret vice, suggesting his public morality masked private depravity. They claimed his incorruptibility was actually dictatorial ambition. And they sent him to the guillotine. The lesson is stark: Robespierre's greatest strength, his incorruptible virtue, became his fatal weakness. If he had displayed some minor vices, some human flaws, some relatable imperfections, he would have been less threatening. His colleagues could have bonded with him over shared weaknesses. They could have felt superior to him in some dimensions even while respecting his strengths in others. But perfect virtue is intolerable in the imperfect. It must be destroyed. Let's understand the neurological basis for why appearing too perfect triggers such destructive responses. Your brain contains a structure called the ventral striatum, which is involved in processing rewards and social comparisons. When you observe someone else receiving a reward or achieving success, this area activates. But here's what's fascinating: it activates differently depending on how you perceive your relationship to that person. If you see someone you consider your peer succeeding, the ventral striatum shows reduced activation. Their success actually feels like a loss to you. Your brain processes their gain as your relative loss, even though objectively nothing has been taken from you. But if you see someone you consider superior succeeding, someone whose status is already clearly above yours, the effect is different. Your brain doesn't compare as directly because you're in different categories. A peasant doesn't feel envious when a king gains more power because they're not in competition. The status difference is too large. The danger zone is in the middle. When someone appears to be your equal but performs far better, or when someone slightly above you seems to be pulling away, or worst of all, when someone appears perfect in ways that highlight your imperfections, that's when the ventral striatum shows the strongest negative response. That's when envy becomes most intense and most dangerous. This is compounded by another neural mechanism, the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors for social exclusion and status threats. When you encounter someone whose perfection implicitly excludes you from their tier, who makes you feel like you don't belong in their category, this area activates. An activation of the anterior cingulate cortex is experienced as actual pain. Social pain. The pain of feeling inferior, excluded, inadequate. This pain demands relief. And the easiest relief is to bring the perfect person down. To find their flaw. To expose their weakness. To eliminate the source of the painful comparison. This is why appearing too perfect is so dangerous. You're not just making people admire you. You're causing them literal psychological pain. And they will, consciously or unconsciously, seek to eliminate that pain by eliminating your apparent perfection. Let's see how this principle operates in the modern workplace, because this is where most people will encounter the dangers of appearing too perfect. Imagine you're exceptional at your job. You consistently exceed expectations. You solve problems others can't solve. You work longer hours, produce better results, require less supervision. You're the model employee. Surely this makes you valuable and secure, right? Wrong. This makes you a target. Your colleagues see your excellence as an implicit criticism of their adequacy. When you stay late, you make those who leave on time look lazy. When you solve complex problems, you make those who struggle look incompetent. When you exceed expectations, you raise expectations for everyone else. And here's what's crucial: your manager, the person whose support you need most, may be the most threatened of all. Because your excellence highlights any gaps in their own competence. If you're better at certain aspects of the job than they are, if you make them look bad by comparison, if you seem like you could do their job better than they do, you've become a threat. A secure, confident manager might recognize your value and promote you. But most managers are not secure and confident. Most are anxious about their own position, worried about their own performance, concerned about their own image. And your perfection makes them feel inadequate. So what happens? You don't get promoted. You get isolated. Your achievements get minimized or attributed to others. Your mistakes, however minor, get magnified. Colleagues exclude you from informal networks. Your manager finds reasons to criticize you. Projects get reassigned. Resources get withdrawn. You're being punished precisely for your excellence. Not because anyone consciously thinks this person is too good so let's destroy them, but because your apparent perfection triggers unconscious envy and resentment that expresses itself as seemingly rational objections. They're not a team player. Translation: their excellence makes the team look bad. They're too focused on individual achievement. Translation: their success highlights others' lack of success. They don't fit the culture. Translation: their perfection disrupts the comfortable mediocrity we've established. They lack leadership qualities. Translation: they make current leaders feel inadequate. This is how organizations lose their best people. Not through logical evaluation of performance but through the unconscious operation of envy triggered by apparent perfection. Now let's examine the dark art of strategic imperfection, because the masters of Law 46 don't just avoid appearing too perfect. They actively cultivate carefully chosen flaws. This is perhaps the most sophisticated application of the law, deliberately displaying harmless imperfections to make yourself seem more human, more relatable, more safe to be around. Think about this strategically. If envy is triggered by apparent perfection, then the solution is to not appear perfect. But you can't actually become incompetent. You can't actually fail at important things. So you need to choose your imperfections carefully. The art is in displaying flaws that are visible enough to be reassuring but trivial enough to not actually harm you. These are what we might call endearing imperfections. They humanize you without diminishing you. Consider small social clumsiness. You forget minor details occasionally. You tell self-deprecating stories about harmless mistakes. You admit to relatable weaknesses like being bad at remembering names or being disorganized about personal matters. These imperfections make you seem human, accessible, not threatening. Or consider having opinions or interests that are slightly unconventional but not controversial. Maybe you have an unusual hobby. Maybe you have strong opinions about trivial matters like the correct way to make coffee. These quirks give people something to feel superior about without actually threatening your competence in areas that matter. The key is that these imperfections must be in domains that don't affect your core value. If you're valued for analytical thinking, you can afford to display emotional imperfection. If you're valued for creativity, you can afford to display some organizational chaos. If you're valued for strategic vision, you can afford to display tactical clumsiness. What you're doing is giving people permission to feel superior to you in some dimension. You're providing relief from the pain of comparison. You're saying, I'm not perfect, I'm human like you, we're in this together. And this makes you safe. It makes you likable. It makes people want to support you rather than destroy you. This is why many successful leaders deliberately cultivate a signature flaw. They become known for one particular weakness that everyone can joke about, that becomes part of their personal brand. This weakness provides a pressure release valve for envy. People can feel superior in that one dimension while still respecting and following the leader in all the dimensions that actually matter. Let's examine a historical master of this principle, Benjamin Franklin. Franklin was extraordinarily accomplished, a successful businessman, brilliant inventor, skilled diplomat, founding father of the United States. By any measure, he was exceptional. He should have been unbearably envied and hated. But Franklin understood Law 46 intuitively. He deliberately cultivated an image of folksy imperfection. He dressed simply, often unfashionably. He told self-deprecating jokes. He admitted to youthful mistakes and character flaws in his autobiography. He portrayed himself as a regular person who happened to work hard and get lucky, rather than as a superior being. More subtly, he would sometimes play dumb in negotiations, asking obvious questions, appearing to not fully understand complex issues. This made his counterparts feel superior, more intelligent, more sophisticated. They underestimated him. They let their guard down. And then Franklin would quietly achieve exactly what he wanted. When he went to France as American ambassador during the Revolutionary War, he dressed in simple brown clothes and a fur cap, playing the role of the simple American frontiersman, even though he was one of the most sophisticated intellectuals of his era. The French court found this charming rather than threatening. He became a celebrity without generating the envy that would have accompanied an American who tried to out-sophisticate the sophisticated French. Franklin's genius was that his displayed imperfections were strategic choices that masked his actual perfection. He appeared humble while being ambitious. He appeared simple while being brilliant. He appeared lucky while being skillful. And because he gave people these comfortable narratives to explain his success, they never had to confront the uncomfortable reality of his superiority. This is mastery of Law 46. He was exceptionally accomplished while appearing charmingly imperfect. Now we need to confront the paradox at the heart of modern meritocracy, because we live in a culture that claims to value excellence above all else while simultaneously punishing those who display it too perfectly. We're told from childhood, work hard, excel, be the best you can be. Organizations claim they want top performers. Leaders say they're building cultures of excellence. Everyone professes to admire achievement. But this is the public story, the official narrative. The actual social reality is far more complex and darker. Yes, people want you to be good. But not too good. They want you to be successful. But not too successful. They want you to be competent. But not so competent that you make them feel incompetent. There's an invisible ceiling of acceptable excellence. Exceed it, and you trigger the ancient social mechanisms that have always existed to prevent any individual from rising too far above the group. Because throughout human evolutionary history, individuals who became too powerful were dangerous to everyone else. They could dominate resources, impose their will, threaten others' survival. So human groups developed psychological and social mechanisms to constrain excessive individual excellence. In primitive societies, this took the form of sharing obligations, leveling mechanisms, sometimes even ritual humiliation of successful hunters. In modern societies, it takes subtler forms: social exclusion, reputational attacks, organizational politics, the tall poppy syndrome where those who rise highest get cut down. We pretend we've evolved beyond this. We claim we live in meritocracies where excellence is purely rewarded. But watch what actually happens. The person who's too smart gets labeled as lacking emotional intelligence. The person who's too successful gets accused of being cutthroat. The person who's too perfect gets torn down the moment they display the slightest flaw. This creates a terrible bind for talented people. To succeed, you must be excellent. But to survive, you cannot appear too excellent. You must perform a delicate dance, achieving highly while appearing to achieve modestly. You must be brilliant while seeming merely competent. You must win while making others feel they haven't lost. This is exhausting and dishonest. It requires constant self-monitoring, constant management of others' perceptions, constant suppression of your full capabilities. But it's necessary, because the alternative is to trigger the envy that will destroy you. Let's understand the specific mechanisms through which appearing too perfect leads to destruction, because it's not just a vague social discomfort. There are specific, predictable patterns. First comes isolation. When you appear too perfect, people stop confiding in you. They don't share their struggles, their doubts, their mistakes. Because they assume you wouldn't understand, you've never experienced these problems. Or worse, they fear your judgment. Gradually, you become excluded from the informal networks where real information flows, where alliances form, where decisions actually get made. Second comes selective attention to your flaws. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has bad days. Everyone occasionally underperforms. When you're liked and seen as human, these moments get forgiven and forgotten. But when you appear too perfect, these moments get magnified and remembered. Your mistakes become evidence that you were never actually that good, that you were fooling everyone, that you're a fraud who's finally been exposed. Third comes attribution distortion. Your successes get attributed to luck, circumstance, or unfair advantages. Your failures get attributed to your fundamental character. You succeeded because you had resources others didn't have, or because the task was easy, or because you got lucky. But you failed because you're actually not as good as you seemed, because your perfection was fake, because you were always secretly flawed. Fourth comes active sabotage. People who feel threatened by your perfection will consciously or unconsciously create obstacles. They'll withhold information you need. They'll exclude you from important meetings. They'll spread subtle doubts about your abilities. They'll create political coalitions against you. They'll work to ensure you fail, because your failure validates their assessment that you were never really that perfect. And fifth comes the final attack. When you inevitably show a significant flaw, make a serious mistake, experience a real failure, that's when the accumulated envy releases all at once. People pile on. They attack with disproportionate fury. They don't just criticize the specific mistake, they use it as evidence to tear down your entire reputation. The fall from apparent perfection is always more dramatic and more brutal than anyone else's fall would be for the same mistake. This is why appearing too perfect is ultimately self-destructive. You're not building security through excellence. You're building a powder keg that will eventually explode. Let's examine how to navigate hierarchies when you're highly competent, because this is where Law 46 becomes most tactically important. The key insight is this: different levels of the hierarchy require different strategies around displaying perfection. With superiors, with those above you in the hierarchy, you generally want to appear very competent but not perfect. You want to show that you can solve their problems, that you're valuable, that you deserve promotion. But you also want to show that you respect their superior position, that you don't threaten their status, that you still need their guidance. This means occasionally asking for advice even when you don't need it. It means crediting them for your successes. It means displaying uncertainty about decisions they could help with. You're managing their ego, ensuring they feel their superiority is intact even as you demonstrate your competence. With peers, with those at your level, you need to be much more careful. This is where envy is most dangerous because you're in direct comparison. Here, strategic imperfection is essential. You need to be good enough to be respected but imperfect enough to be relatable. You need victories but also visible struggles. You need successes but also humanizing failures. This means being generous in sharing credit. It means asking peers for help sometimes and offering help other times, creating reciprocal relationships rather than hierarchical ones. It means celebrating others' successes genuinely because that reduces the comparative pain they feel about your successes. With subordinates, with those below you, you have more freedom to display excellence, but you must never display perfection in a way that makes them feel hopeless. They need to see that your position is achievable, that your skills can be learned, that the gap between you and them is bridgeable. This means being open about your past struggles and mistakes. It means mentoring rather than just demonstrating. It means showing that you once were where they are now, and they can eventually be where you are now. You're positioning yourself as an advanced version of them rather than as a fundamentally different category of being. The overall strategy is to modulate your apparent perfection based on who's observing and what their psychological needs are. You're not actually becoming less competent. You're strategically choosing what to reveal and what to downplay. Now let's explore a dimension of Law 46 that often gets overlooked: the relationship between perfection and innovation. Because there's a hidden cost to appearing too perfect that goes beyond envy and social destruction. It's the cost of creative stagnation. When you cultivate an image of perfection, when you become known for never making mistakes, for always having the right answer, for being flawless in execution, you create a psychological prison for yourself. You become terrified of experimentation. You avoid risks. You stick to what you know works because anything else might reveal imperfection. Innovation requires failure. Real breakthrough thinking comes from trying things that might not work, from exploring dead ends, from making mistakes and learning from them. But if your entire identity is built on appearing perfect, you cannot afford to fail. So you stop innovating. You become conservative. You optimize existing approaches rather than discovering new ones. This is why many of the most innovative companies deliberately cultivate cultures that celebrate intelligent failure. They understand that the fear of appearing imperfect kills creativity. They create environments where people can experiment, fail, learn, and try again without destroying their reputation. Think about the greatest innovators in history. Were they perfect? Far from it. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before creating a working light bulb. The Wright brothers crashed repeatedly before achieving flight. Marie Curie's early experiments were filled with errors and setbacks. What made them great wasn't perfection. It was persistence through imperfection. If Edison had been obsessed with appearing perfect, he would have quit after the first 100 failures. If the Wright brothers had feared looking foolish, they never would have left the ground. If Curie had needed to appear flawless to her peers, she would never have pursued the experimental work that led to her discoveries. The irony is that appearing too perfect not only makes you vulnerable to envy-driven destruction, it also limits your actual ability to achieve genuine excellence. Real mastery comes through embracing imperfection as part of the learning process. The person who admits they don't know something can learn it. The person who must appear to know everything remains ignorant. This creates another strategic dimension to Law 46. When you display imperfection, particularly in the form of curiosity and learning, you're not just making yourself socially safe. You're also creating the psychological space you need for genuine growth and innovation. The master practitioner of Law 46 understands that strategic imperfection serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It protects against envy. It creates social connection. It enables authentic learning. And it provides the freedom to take the risks that lead to genuine breakthrough achievements. Let's also examine the cultural variations in how perfection is perceived, because Law 46 doesn't operate identically in all societies. In many Western cultures, particularly American culture, there's a tradition of rugged individualism and self-made success. The cultural narrative celebrates the person who rises from nothing through pure merit and effort. In this context, displaying too much perfection can trigger resentment, but it's somewhat mitigated if you also display the struggle, the hard work, the bootstrap narrative of overcoming obstacles. The American version of strategic imperfection often involves emphasizing your humble origins, your early struggles, your failures that you overcame. You can appear highly successful now as long as people believe you earned it through suffering and effort rather than through inherent superiority or unfair advantages. In many East Asian cultures, there's a stronger emphasis on group harmony and collective success. The cultural value of modesty is more pronounced. In this context, appearing too perfect is even more dangerous because it violates the norm of humility. The strategic imperfection here often takes the form of verbal self-deprecation, of attributing success to luck or to the help of others, of emphasizing collective achievement over individual excellence. A Japanese executive might describe a major success by saying "we were fortunate" or "thanks to my team's support" even when their individual contribution was decisive. This isn't false modesty in the Western sense. It's a cultural strategy for managing the social dynamics of appearing successful while maintaining group harmony. In some European cultures, particularly in Scandinavian countries, there's the concept of janteloven, the law of Jandy, which explicitly states that no one should think they're better than anyone else. In these contexts, appearing too perfect triggers even stronger negative reactions. The strategic imperfection required is more extreme. Successful people must actively downplay their achievements, avoid standing out, present themselves as ordinary despite extraordinary accomplishments. Understanding these cultural variations is crucial for anyone operating in international contexts. The same level of perfection that might be acceptable or even expected in one culture could be socially catastrophic in another. The master of Law 46 adjusts their strategy based on the cultural environment they're operating in. But regardless of culture, the underlying psychological mechanism remains constant. Humans compare themselves to others, feel pain when the comparison is unfavorable, and seek to eliminate that pain by bringing down those who appear too superior. Now we must grapple with the moral implications of Law 46, because everything I've described involves a degree of deception that might feel uncomfortable. Is it ethical to deliberately appear less perfect than you are? Is it honest to cultivate strategic imperfections? Is it right to hide your full capabilities to avoid triggering envy? These questions don't have simple answers. On one hand, you could argue that authenticity demands showing your true self, displaying your full capabilities, refusing to diminish yourself to manage others' insecurities. This is the ethic of radical honesty and full self-expression. On the other hand, you could argue that social intelligence demands understanding psychological reality, that working with human nature rather than against it is wisdom not deception, that managing others' emotional responses is part of functioning effectively in society. This is the ethic of pragmatic adaptation. I would suggest the answer depends on your goals and values. If your goal is simply to accumulate power for its own sake, then Law 46 is purely manipulative. You're deceiving people about who you are to exploit their psychological vulnerabilities. This is using strategic imperfection as a tool of manipulation. But if your goal is to accomplish something valuable, to make a genuine contribution, to lead effectively, then Law 46 might be ethical wisdom. Because triggering envy doesn't just harm you, it harms your mission. When people destroy you out of envy, whatever you are trying to accomplish suffers. Your team loses a valuable member. Your organization loses a productive contributor. Your cause loses an effective advocate. In this light, managing how perfect you appear isn't about deceiving people for selfish gain. It's about managing social dynamics so you can continue doing valuable work. It's about recognizing that human psychology has limitations and blind spots, and working within those constraints rather than being destroyed by them. The key ethical distinction is between strategic imperfection that enables contribution and fake imperfection that enables exploitation. Are you downplaying your perfection so you can continue serving others? Or are you doing it to continue dominating others? Your intention matters. Your ultimate purpose matters. The same technique can be ethical or unethical depending on what you're trying to achieve. Let's bring this to the deeply personal level, because Law 46 doesn't just apply to careers and organizations. It applies to every aspect of human social life, including intimate relationships. Think about romantic partnerships. What happens when one partner appears too perfect? When one person seems to have no flaws, no struggles, no vulnerabilities. It creates crushing psychological pressure on the other partner. They feel perpetually inadequate. They can never measure up. They feel like they're always failing by comparison. This doesn't create admiration and security. It creates resentment and eventual sabotage. The less perfect partner will unconsciously work to bring the perfect partner down, to find or create flaws, to ensure the gap isn't so vast. The healthiest relationships involve mutual vulnerability, shared imperfections, reciprocal weakness, and strength. When both partners can be imperfect together, when both can admit flaws and ask for help and show uncertainty, that's when true intimacy forms. Appearing too perfect in an intimate relationship is not impressive. It's alienating. It prevents connection because connection requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires the admission of imperfection. The same applies to friendships. The friend who appears to have life perfectly together, who never struggles, who never needs support, who never shows weakness, that friend becomes exhausting to be around. Friendship is exchange. It's reciprocal support, reciprocal vulnerability, reciprocal humanity. If you appear too perfect, you're not offering the gift of your humanity. You're offering a mirror that reflects others' inadequacy back at them. This is why humble bragging is so universally hated. It's the attempt to appear imperfect while actually highlighting perfection. Ugh, I'm so tired from my vacation in the Maldives. I can't believe I have to choose between these two amazing job offers. I'm so bad at accepting compliments about my appearance. People see through this immediately. You're trying to appear human while actually emphasizing how superior you are. It generates even more envy than direct bragging because it's manipulative and dishonest. True application of Law 46 in personal relationships means genuinely sharing your struggles, actually being vulnerable about your uncertainties, really showing the imperfect human beneath whatever polished exterior you present to the world. Let's peer into the future implications of Law 46, because we're entering an era where appearing too perfect is becoming simultaneously easier and more dangerous. Social media has created an environment where everyone curates a highlight reel of their life. People share their successes, their beautiful moments, their achievements. The platform economics reward this. Posts about victories get more engagement than posts about struggles. This creates an arms race of apparent perfection. Everyone is trying to appear successful, happy, accomplished, living their best life. And this is making everyone miserable. Because when you scroll through social media, you're bombarded with hundreds of people who all appear more perfect than you. Your brain doesn't process this as these are curated highlights. It processes it as everyone is doing better than me. The psychological damage from this is enormous and well documented. Depression, anxiety, feelings of inadequacy, all correlate with social media use. We're triggering the envy mechanism at scale, constantly, in ways human psychology never evolved to handle. And yet, the people who appear most perfect on social media often become the most hated. We love to see influencers exposed as frauds, celebrities revealed as deeply flawed, perfect-seeming people caught in scandals. There's a whole genre of content devoted to tearing down people who seem too good to be true. This is Law 46 operating in the digital age. Appear too perfect online, and you become a target for the collective envy of millions. The wise approach in this environment is selective authenticity. Share enough success to be inspirational but enough struggle to be relatable. Show enough achievement to be interesting but enough vulnerability to be human. Give people permission to connect with your imperfection while still respecting your accomplishment. But there's another future trend: artificial intelligence and human augmentation. As technology makes it possible to genuinely enhance human capabilities, we'll face new versions of the perfection problem. When someone has genuinely superior cognitive abilities because of neural implants, or genuinely superior physical abilities because of genetic modification, how will society handle the envy this generates? The people who appear too perfect in the future might not be managing perception. They might actually be fundamentally superior. And that will test Law 46 in ways we've never seen before. Will enhanced humans need to hide their enhancements to avoid triggering envy? Will societies create leveling mechanisms to prevent some humans from becoming too superior to others? Will we see a new form of prejudice against the enhanced, driven by envy of their perfection? These are not hypothetical questions. They're coming within our lifetimes. Here's where we must confront the deepest truth about Law 46, the truth that makes it so tragic and so necessary. Envy is perhaps the most destructive emotion in human experience. It doesn't just harm the person who's envied. It corrodes the soul of the person feeling it. It turns achievement into pain, success into torture, excellence into an accusation. It makes the world smaller, darker, meaner. And the worst part is that envy is often unconscious. People don't realize they're destroying someone out of envy. They genuinely believe their rationalizations. They convince themselves they have legitimate reasons for their attacks, for their resentment, for their desire to see the perfect person fall. Law 46 exists not because the world is just or because excellence is properly rewarded. It exists because the world contains envy, and envy seeks to destroy apparent perfection. The law is descriptive, not prescriptive. It describes a tragic feature of human psychology, not an ideal state of affairs. In a better world, we wouldn't need Law 46. In a better world, excellence would be purely celebrated, perfection would inspire rather than threaten, another person's success would be experienced as expansion rather than diminishment. But we don't live in that better world. We live in this world, with these brains, with these psychological mechanisms that evolved over millions of years for purposes that have nothing to do with fairness or justice or rational evaluation of merit. So you face a choice. You can rage against this reality. You can insist on displaying your full excellence, your complete perfection, your total superiority. You can refuse to make any concessions to human envy. And you will likely be destroyed, unless you're so powerful that destruction becomes impossible. And even then, you'll be isolated, surrounded by resentment, unable to truly connect with other human beings. Or you can accept this reality. You can recognize that appearing too perfect triggers psychological mechanisms you cannot control in others. You can strategically modulate your apparent perfection, cultivating humanizing imperfections, displaying vulnerability, giving others permission to feel adequate in your presence. And through this acceptance, this strategic imperfection, you can build lasting success, genuine relationships, and the space to make real contributions. This isn't about compromising your excellence. It's about being wise enough to understand human nature and work with it rather than being destroyed by it. So I leave you with this question: what imperfections will you choose to display? What harmless flaws will you cultivate to make your excellence bearable to others? How will you appear human enough to connect while remaining excellent enough to contribute? The answer to these questions might determine whether you achieve your potential or become a cautionary tale about the price of appearing too perfect. The choice is yours. But choose wisely. Because in the game of power, appearing too perfect is often the first step toward losing everything.